I've talked enough. There should be questions. Sorry.
I think you've provoked some questions, surely. Yeah, I have to say before we go any further, I'm just intrigued who you are actually in the audience. And if I just did a really crude thing, which is just stick your hand up if you see yourself as an artist or a scientist, then I'd be really just helpful to me. If you think you are more of a scientist than you are an artist, so you're a scientist, can you put your hand up? So we've got scientists. Okay, just get a rough idea. All right, thank you. Artists, where are you? Okay, you're, all right, fair enough. And I'm very aware that some people put their hands up for both, which is fine, because you see yourself as both scientists and artists. Got lots of artists in the room, it seems. So we have a comment from Mark, actually 3, which was about what do scientists get, or what does science get from arts and artists. Anyone want to comment on those, at least those 3 things he said? Inspiration, free good publicity, and almost the stupid question, having to explain it. I can see 3 hands up. I see more than 3. I see several. Right, this is where we need several microphones. There's a hand right at the back that was first. Oops. Yeah.
Hi, Barnaby Adams from the Institute of Converging Arts and Science at Greenwich University. I'm a research fellow there. I'd like to ask the panel, but in particular Professor Lancaster, about a word that we haven't heard mentioned so far, which is method. You spoke of the intuition almost kind of being a way of kick-starting directions in research and directions in method. But I wonder if it's possible to imagine a conflation of scientific research method and artistic practice, or are the 2 absolutely impossible to mingle?
I think it's, I mean, first of all, I think this presupposes that there is one scientific method and that scientists just go about things in exactly the same way, in some sort of rigorous, defined track. I mean, I'm part of collaborations of hundreds and hundreds of physicists, and within that, there are barely any 2 people that work in the same way. Everything that we do as part of collaborations tends to be working in small teams where people have different ideas and different inputs. So I struggle to even think that there is such a scientific method. At the end, we tend to publish a paper which has to be defended statistically or in whatever way. But I think the means that you get from A to B are very different, I think, depending on branches of science, the nationalities of the scientists involved, and the personalities of the science.
Many people I know consider your description of your methodology as hard practice in itself.
As hard practice? What, in terms of that we go from an idea or a measurement to a publication?
Simply the different networks and nodal methods of communication in itself is standard hard practice.
But we invented the web, for instance, as a means to have another means of communication. So I don't think we're in a sort of closed methodology where we go, right, this is the only possible way that we can operate. We may turn quite slowly in terms of moving to different ways of operating, but I wouldn't say that we're stuck in a particular methodology. I think the end point is fixed by and large, but.
Can I come in on the question of method? I actually had method down as the first point that I wanted to discuss, and I think method is very relevant. The way good art and science projects work in my mind is with lots of time. You have to give time to develop that method together, so that the method is not one rigid method there, but that there is a conjunction of different ways of working together. As an example, I was asked to bring examples and not talk too generally. The example that I can bring at the moment, we are working, as I said, with dancers and a psychologist and with a dancer and neuroscientists. And what we're being told is that we have to control the variance during the experiments. And that is clearly a very useful method in science. If you have a hypothesis and you want to achieve something with it, and the outcome, whether it's science or art, it's very important that we know what we're doing step by step, and we control the variance. So we don't add light and sound and movement and also different color all at the same time, because we will not know what had the effect that we then get at the end. The scientists understand. I think the artists understand as well. So again, you go back to what is good science and what is good art. So what are we, and that takes me to what do the neuroscientists gain at the moment from the project we're doing. We're still doing the project, so I can't really, we haven't published it yet. What the immediate thing that was being gained yesterday during the whole day's experiment at UCL at the Sobel department was that we were looking at Parkinson's disease patients and their impeded movements, freezing when crossing a threshold and having a difficult time getting out of a chair where the measured point, the points of force are measured. And Russell Malifant suggested that perhaps one of the ways of getting out of a chair for a patient with Parkinson's disease would not be the one straight up, which the scientists were using, but would actually be one with a torsion of the body. So going from left leg to right leg and going back to the left leg and using that torsion, which a contemporary dancer uses. Well, Brian hadn't thought of it. The experiment said, get out of a chair straight up, which is, of course, the most difficult thing you can do. Now, whether we're going to change that, whether that's going to be different. The other thing that I suggested during the experiment was, have you tried giving a different sound to the patient walking? It seems that visual markers make a difference. The patient walks more quickly when there are visual markers like a zebra crossing, so that visually you're sort of gaining your movement. Have you ever thought of using rhythmic music or music that makes you move? I mean, after all, that's what dance is about, is moving to music. Brian hadn't thought of it, so we're going to try the experiments he's doing with the patients, adding music in a controlled way. So it's not adding music and light and also the zebra crossing, the visual markers, but adding one by one. And if we didn't do that by one, then our project would not be validated by the people who gave us the grant. And so the experiment has to be scientific. Now, I would argue that good art is also about controlling experiments. The main difference is that we don't have a way of writing them up. Artists don't culturally, normally, don't write the experiments up. And that's where the credibility falters. That's where the problem of rigor, because it seems that there is a question of rigor. You know, artists do it in a sort of wishy-washy way, whereas scientists write them up. We can prove it and we can show it to you. So that's where we have to work a little bit, and that's where the art and science...
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I just wanted to say that a lot of artists have diaries.
Yeah.
And so there are quite a few artists who actually do write it up. They may not be published.
Okay, just, there's some hands going up. There's a hand over here, just earlier. Yeah, there's a gentleman there, I think. Just, Andy.
It's a complex question. We can't say it in 2 minutes.
I'm a particle physicist in Mark's group, and I've got a question to the artists. Does beauty have anything to do with art these days?
Does beauty have anything to do with art these days?
The reason I ask is that recently at the Institute of Physics we had a talk about Paul Dirac and the religion of beauty by Graham Farmelo from the Open University and the Science Museum. And his argument is that Paul Dirac's test for the quality of his theoretical physics was whether the results were beautiful. And that's why I ask, do artists nowadays have a concern about beauty?
Shall I talk about this?
Well,
That is what I would like to ask the artists, what they feel about that.
yeah.
All right, let's see. Anybody
Wouldn't mind answering.
have a go? Yeah? Liliane?
Well, first I would say that, you know, beauty, the word beauty, let's put it this way, I don't think it's that much the concept, but the word beauty has been relegated to the unfashionable for some time in the arts. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but the point is we need to establish what beauty is, because in fact your idea of beauty may be completely different from mine. In other words, everybody has a different idea of what is beautiful. And of course physics and mathematics also consider, I mean, it is basically very important to have a very beautiful theory or a beautiful formula or whatever. But I think this works in art too, myself, except that again, you can't say it. You can't just say, oh, well, my work is beautiful. Because basically, what does that mean, you see? It isn't, it's perhaps, in fact, if you like, it is a kind of movement towards moving away from the wishy-washy, you know, the unspecific, to something more precise in the arts. The idea of going away from this term beauty. I'm not for it. I don't think that I wouldn't not use that term myself. But I do think you do need to be more specific about it, because beauty is a very general term and can become very kitsch as well.
All right. We're not going to answer that question, that's for sure. Another question.
Just from the science side.
Yeah, science side. Okay.
I mean, I think David made it's a very good point. I mean, from the science side, defining beauty again is slightly difficult, but I think it's easier than on the art side. But in general, people, I mean, it's a prejudice that we have a reductionist view that everything should come, in the end, should come down to something simple, which has worked pretty well in science for, you know, certainly the last 100 years. That may ultimately be a flawed logic, but in the end, we're looking for things which are concise and symmetric in the end, and simple. I mean, that's our definition of beauty, and that tends to be expressed mathematically. But certainly, I know that the symmetry, even in terms of something which is slightly facile, is if you take an image of somebody's face and you look at their left and the right face, the face is ever so slightly different. And if you go and ask 50 people who you think is the most beautiful person, it's the person with the most symmetric left side and right side of their face. And so again, there's this notion of, symmetry underlies everything. Most of modern physics is actually flawed by things which break that symmetry, or there's a very important concept in modern physics, things which erstwhile are symmetric. You take a snowflake which is beautifully symmetric, and you heat it up, and then spontaneously it changes into water or steam or whatever, which doesn't appear to have the same symmetry or is very different. And that's a very powerful idea in modern physics. And that, I think, is what David is getting at, is the sort of beauty of what we see in physics, is symmetry. And
may I just come back a second? I think that's very similar to art, because in contemporary art, basically you move away from symmetry, and even moving away from simplicity, although simplicity is still, I think, quite important, but move away from symmetry to transformation, to change, just something that is moving, changing, not static.